Bebop. The fuck is that word, bebop? Kind of organically came along because the audience were listening to the Dizzy Gillespie and the like scatting and just doing these gibberish kind of scat things, and a lot of times they ended in rebob, and bebop and rebop. We're playing Dizzy Gillespie here from RCA Recordings. I don't have this on vinyl, but this is complete the RCA Victor years. Bebop really came about in the early mid-40s, really started happening at the end of the war, during World War II, at the end of World War II, and kind of a reaction in a way to, you know, swing, which was getting tired, big band swing, and you know, we love, excuse me, as I choke here, we love Duke Ellington. I mean, Duke Ellington's big band stuff was really happening with the singers. You know, amazing array of artists went through the Duke Ellington band in the, you know, 30s, 40s, early 40s, and then you know, people wanted to dance. People wanted to have a good time during World War II. Duke Ellington. These aren't all obviously bebop records. Some of these are from the this is actually from the 50s. This is an amazing analog productions record, more orchestrated stuff, really amazing stuff. So I highly recommend that. The records I show are, you know, influence into bebop and during bebop, and then some of the artists doing post-bebop, some jazz stuff, because I always see just where everyone's into the Blue Note and the, you know, impulse stuff, which is amazing stuff, but I don't see a lot of this early stuff here. But listen to that. If you can hear that in the background, this stuff just great. I mean, bebop really just went to a whole different thing after swing. Smaller bands, smaller groups, much faster, more improvisational, different, you know, sometimes tone, note bending is in a way, and just really kind of smack. Those guys, and they were all guys, but had to really be on their toes and had to have total control of their instruments. This is a later album, one of my favorites. It's not a bebop, but later, because if you know, Diz gets into the whole Afro-Cuban thing a little later. There's a great couple versions of Caravan, which is a jazz classic written by Duke Ellington. That's on here. If you see this record, pick it up. Savoy Sessions, a lot of them recorded sort of during the war, at the end of the war, small studio types of things. You know, and a lot of these big orchestras started shrinking too during World War II, these big swing bands, because everyone was going into the military. So the smaller bands started forming, started jamming a little more, and you know, a lot of these people were influenced by the likes of you know, bands like Earl Hines. Here's some of my Earl Hines collections. Great piano player. Again, these aren't all from specific sessions, but Earl Father Hines, great band leader. Again, some of these are later recordings. This is probably on cue here for this discussion, but these are from my collection of Earl Hines. And then, of course, the great band leader Cab Calloway. And, you know, that was a really big thing. Personality also really made for the popularization of these jazz bands and orchestras. Cab Calloway, if you know his work, you know, Minnie the Moocher, his vocalizing, but his amazing orchestrations. But a lot of, again, artists came out of this kind of era. So, again, not in any particular order, you know, also during that time, you know, we got Lester Young, Lester Young, great saxophone player. He influenced Ben Webster, also of the era. Lester Young and Ben Webster are two of my favorite jazz sax players. And then obviously artists like Roy Eldridge got into it and kind of got into the whole bop thing early on with Dizzy Gillespie as well. And the other two artists that you can't not mention when it comes to bebop. Thelonious Monk. This is actually a 10-inch reissue of various prestige 10 inches. Of course, Sonny Rollins as well. Sonny Rollins was really kind of getting into that, one of the younger guys at the time getting into that. So Sonny Rollins was also a part of that scene. As I said, Roy Eldridge, Art Tatum, Charlie Christian, who also played with the big bands like Benny Goodman on the swing bands. I should show these longer. Don't you hate when people just throw these down here? Charlie Christian, great album. Electric guitar, early electric guitar. Also, Don Byas was one of the first to embrace and get into the bop, the bebop. I'm thinking of bebop, like Paul McCartney. No, bebop thing. Obviously, this is a later album. This is not a bebop collection, but Don Byas is one. But again, the one horn player that everyone knows. You can't have a discussion about bebop without talking about the great Charlie Parker, who coincidentally, or by the way, next year in 2020 is celebrating his 100th birthday, or actually we're celebrating his 100th birthday. He won't be attending. This is a great Savoy box set, but you know next year, over the next year, there's going to be a ton of 100th celebration reissues, issues, things maybe we don't know about, and the like. So Charlie Parker, I'm a big fan of Charlie Parker. These are not all related to bebop, these particular albums, but Charlie Parker Quintet with Bud Powell and Fats Navarro. These are Columbia reissues from the 70s. Again, I love this stuff. You know, it's mono records. It's some of his stuff is with strings and very lush. Still gorgeous work. Some of it is bebop, but he also got into the whole, you know, pastoral type of thing too. So anytime I see Charlie Parker records at a decent price, I pick them up. And of course, Diz and these artists got into the whole Afro-Cuban thing, more into the, you know, early and mid 50s, so, and especially Diz. Great stuff. My only dig on these two, I got these in the 70s, and this is when those fucking record companies were doing the rechannel for stereo thing. So unfortunately, I went mono because none of us really gave a shit about mono in the 70s. We all wanted stereo, you know? We've learned our wicked ways since. But bop, 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 bebop, bop, bop, bebop, rop, ba. Bud Powell is also a great one. Bud Powell is a great Verve collection, so it's not really the bebop stuff, but a great selection of his work as well. Let's see what else we got here. You know, a big part of that, and again, don't have any of the early stuff, but this is not bebop, but Dexter Gordon was, as I said, was a big part of that. But Dexter Gordon records, I have some Music Matters stuff, and I'll just show these three just to showcase Dexter. But again, this is much later, and it's not the bebop thing. But bebop, you know, was just so fast syncopation. Kenny Clark, I got to mention Kenny Clark. Kenny Clark was probably the first drummer that really got that rhythm going into bebop. He started using a ride cymbal rather than just the hi-hat, and a larger set to a point, really kind of bombastic. But, you know, bebop's really, of course it's about the piano and the horns and everything, but the rhythm section is what holds it together and what differentiates it from, you know, swing or anything else. But bebop had its moments in the, you know, mid to late 40s into the early mid 50s and everything. And it's a great sound. Everyone, you know, I know there's a whole school now that are just into that whole hard bop and bop stuff, you know, again, as I said, the Blue Note and beyond. You know, Miles Davis was a little part of that on the tail end, got into that a little bit, but then he was younger and moved on. Johnny Hodges Johnny Hodges is kind of early. This is probably, what, late 40s, I'm thinking. Johnny Hodges and his orchestra. God, I don't even know when this is. Sometimes you just want to look one place and see the dates. Okay, these are way late. These are like late 50s, so it's a whole different thing. But all these people were involved, mixing in and out of it, mostly in New York and then obviously in Europe. But I've shown a whole video on these 70s Verve reissues, which unreleased and released recordings from great jazz artists that are pretty much, they're all analog and most of them remastered by Robert Ludwig. So again, search out that earlier video I did, and there's a couple of them. There's a Martini version and a completer version later on. So these are really worth getting, usually double albums, and usually fairly inexpensive because people are all like, you know, gaga over Blue Notes and Impulse and the like, which, you know, I totally get. What else can I show you? There's also Coleman Hawkins, which was early on, and in and out of that whole scene too. So Coleman Hawkins was a great artist then. You know, that might be about it. That might be about enough to give you a little taste of bebop. But again, I love bebop. I would say Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie are two. I need to get way more vinyl of Dizzy because I love him. On a personal note, I was fortunate enough to meet separately, but both Earl Father Hines and Dizzy Gillespie in the 70s. I got to spend, I did a recording project, a live recording session with Earl Hines when I was in college in the audio department at San Francisco State. And at the College of Marin, we did a live broadcast for KQED, the public broadcasting station in San Francisco, for Earl Hines. Solo piano, amazing gentleman. It was so cool. I must have been, you know, 19, 20, and I just was in awe. And so I started buying all his records at the time then. He was so great. And then in 78 at the Monterey Jazz Festival, I was in the K Jazz booth, the radio station that broadcasts and sponsors the festival, and sat right next to Earl Hines for about an hour or so while he was totally stoned and being interviewed. So, and he passed around his joint, so I did have a little puff from that cheeky. If you know Dizzy, you know what that means. Cheeky Dizzy Gillespie, or what some would say is the king of bebop. The king of bebop. He didn't invent it, but in a way he really pushed it forward and really grabbed hold, and these guys did some amazing stuff. So that's Mazzy's kind of a little thing. Again, as I always say, I don't know why I do this asterisk thing. Not definitive. There's so many people out here and out there that know so much more about the history of bebop and the details of it than I do. But I'm maybe hope to be that the bridge from a rock and roll fan to introduce you to some other kind of jazz and jazz artists. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any comments or suggestions on other albums in the bebop realm. Don't just go for the 50s and 60s stuff. Go for the 40s. Go for 30s. Go for Ellington. Man, Duke Ellington is probably the most important composer and musician of the last century, in my opinion. I mean, he's well over 100 now, deep in the ground, but Duke Ellington. Anyway, Mazzy loves you, and thanks, VC, for watching. I really appreciate all the love. Take care.